Okay, let's unpack this. If you're diving into sociology, trying to understand how these huge, complex social things work is, well, it's central.
Absolutely.
And few things feel as big, as personal, yet so deeply social as religion and belief systems. How do sociologists even start to make sense of it all?
It can feel a bit overwhelming at first, definitely.
Yeah.
But that's where the sociological toolkit comes in handy. Different theories give us different lenses, different ways to look at these systems and their place in society.
And that's exactly what this deep dive is for you studying this stuff. We've gathered some material, different sources, giving us various perspectives. Think of it like getting different tools to analyze the same fascinating landscape.
Yeah, and our mission today is really to work through this material together. We want to get a solid handle on how sociologists classify religions, maybe explore how belief systems function.
hmm
Are they open to challenge or maybe more closed than we think?
And then the big theories, right? Functionalism, Marxism, feminism, postmodernism. What do they actually say about religion's role? Can it drive social change?
Exactly. It's about building that foundation, understanding the key ideas in the debates. I'm genuinely looking forward to seeing how these different views click together, or maybe clash.
Me too. Those aha moments.
And I'm here to sort of help connect those dots, give some context on why these theories emerged, and really highlight why looking at it from all these angles is, well, essential for a proper sociological understanding.
All right, let's jump right in then. How does the material start classifying different types of belief? How do sociologists even begin to categorize something so vast?
Well, often the starting point is looking at the core belief,
Hmm.
the object of worship or reverence. Probably the most familiar types, especially in the West, are theistic religions.
The ones centered on a god or gods.
Right. So you've got monotheistic ones like Christianity, Islam, Judaism, one God, and then polytheistic like Hinduism or, say, ancient Greek religion with multiple deities. The divine is key there.
Okay, makes sense. Then the sources mention animism.
Yes, animism is the belief that spirits inhabit the natural world. Not just humans, but animals, plants, even features like rivers or mountains. They're seen as active forces.
So, more connected to indigenous or tribal cultures, often. Maybe a stronger link to the environment.
That's often the case, yes. A deep spiritual connection there. And then totemism is brought up as a specific kind of animism.
Right, where a specific thing, like an animal or plant, becomes a sacred symbol for a group.
Exactly that. It's an emblem, a protector, a source of identity. The material points to Durkheim's famous study of Australian Aborigines.
Ah, yes, the totem being central to their group identity and spiritual life. Really fundamental.
Absolutely. It was the sacred for them, in a way. And then moving to something quite different, the sources talk about New Age movements.
These feel distinct from traditional religions, don't they? More about individual growth.
That's the emphasis. Spiritual growth, self-development. They often blend traditions, bits of psychology, maybe some Eastern philosophies, healing practices.
And typically, no single god, no rigid rules. More about personal spirituality over organized religion.
That's generally the idea. People might explicitly reject organized religion in favor of finding their own spiritual path. Spiritual, but maybe not religious in the traditional sense.
So why categorize like this? What's the value for a sociologist?
It gives you a framework, a starting point for comparison.
Mm.
How does a society built around, say, animistic beliefs differ from one structured by monotheism? It helps us ask those sociological questions about structure, culture, and practice across different contexts.
Okay, that makes sense. So moving from the types of belief to their nature. The material talks about open versus closed systems. What's that about?
Uh-huh. This is about how much a belief system or ideology is willing to be questioned, to be challenged, maybe even to change.
And science is often held up as the model of an open system.
That's Karl Popper's influential view. He argued science progresses through falsification. Theories aren't proven true forever. They're just the best we have until evidence proves them wrong. They have to be open to being disproven.
And that constant testing, that openness, is seen as its strength, right? Why it became so dominant, especially after the Enlightenment.
Yes, but then Thomas Kuhn comes along with the, let's say, more nuanced view. He suggests science can actually be quite closed at times.
How so?
Kuhn talked about paradigms, these dominant frameworks, sets of assumptions and practices that guide scientific work, but they can also kind of constrain thinking. Ideas outside the current paradigm might get ignored.
So scientists challenging the status quo could face resistance. It's not always perfectly open then.
Exactly. There can be rigidity, especially when a paradigm is really established. Now, contrast that with religion. The material often describes many religions as fundamentally closed systems.
Meaning they claim a monopoly on truth. Their core beliefs aren't really up for debate or empirical testing in the same way a scientific theory is.
That's the argument. The core tenets are often presented as absolute, divinely revealed, not really open to falsification. And the sources suggest this rigidity might make adapting to social change harder, possibly contributing to secularization.
That difference in openness, it makes you think about how they exert influence differently, doesn't it? And that idea of science having closed aspects is pretty interesting too.
It forces us to look critically at how knowledge systems work, which ties into the next idea, ideology.
Right, a set of beliefs and values that explains the world and justifies a certain way of life. The material says both religion and science can function this way.
Yes, and different theories analyze ideology very differently. The Marxist perspective is, well, quite critical.
They see these belief systems, religion and science included, as tools used by the ruling class, the bourgeoisie.
Essentially, yes. Tools to maintain power and reproduce inequality. The argument is they spread ideas that stop the working class, the proletariat, from seeing how they're being exploited.
The classic example being religion offering hope in the afterlife.
Exactly. If you believe your suffering now will be rewarded in heaven, maybe you're less likely to challenge the earthly system causing that suffering. It dulls the pain, keeps people passive.
Lenin's spiritual djinn phrase really captures that, doesn't it? Something to numb you to the reality of exploitation.
It's a powerful metaphor. Now, shifting lens again, the feminist view also offers a critical perspective on ideology.
But focus on gender inequality, on patriarchy.
Very precisely. They argue that both religion and science have historically been used to justify male dominance and marginalize women.
You can see that in how some religious texts portray women, or even how scientific theories in the past depicted women as somehow inferior.
Absolutely. Think about male-dominated leadership in most major religions, or sacred texts interpreted to mean women are subordinate or impure. Simone de Beauvoir argued, religion tricks women into accepting second place by promising spiritual rewards, similar mechanism to Marx, but focused on gender.
And the material mentions Karen Armstrong pointing to things like women being excluded from becoming bishops, concrete examples of these patriarchal structures.
Which shows how these aren't just abstract beliefs, they have real institutional power. And then there's the postmodernist view.
They're skeptical of these big, all-encompassing explanations, right? These meta-narratives.
Exactly. Postmodernists see today's society as fragmented, diverse. People don't just buy into one big truth anymore. So traditional religions, with their strong claims to absolute truth, tend to lose influence.
Instead, people kind of pick and mix, create their own spirituality.
That's the idea. They draw from various sources to build an identity. So traditional religion might wane, but it opens up space for new, individualized forms of spirituality.
Okay, so 3 really different critical takes, Marxist, feminist, postmodernist, on how belief systems connect to power. It makes you think about which one resonates most when you look around, doesn't it?
It's a great way to start applying these sociological tools. Now, building on that, let's look closer at how the major perspectives see the role of religion in society overall.
And we have to start with functionalism, which generally sees religion positively.
Largely, yes, as contributing to social order, stability, and cohesion. Emil Durkheim is absolutely key here.
His idea of the collective conscience.
That's it. Religion, for Durkheim, creates those shared norms, values, and beliefs that bind society together. It provides the moral framework. He saw it as crucial for teaching people how to behave, integrating them, a form of secondary socialization.
And his study of totemism among Australian Aborigines really illustrated this for him, the shared reverence for the totem unifying the group.
Yes, the collective rituals around the totem reinforced their social bonds, their solidarity. It was the group worshiping itself, in a way.
Then there's Malinowski. He focused more on the individual, didn't he? How religion helps cope with crises.
Right, life crises. Things like death, birth, marriage moments that are emotionally tough and could potentially destabilize things. Religious rituals like funerals or weddings act as rites of passage.
They provide structure, help people process things, and keep society running smoothly through these transitions.
Exactly, restoring equilibrium. And then the material mentions Bella, a neo-functionalist, and his concept of civil religion.
Ah, the idea that secular things can function like religion, like Americanism.
Precisely. Things like reverence for the flag, the Constitution, national holidays. Bella argued these act like a shared faith, uniting people even if they have different actual religious beliefs. It performs a similar social bonding function.
So functionalism keeps asking, how does this help society work? How does it contribute to stability? You can definitely see examples of that, can't you?
Absolutely. But then you get a completely different picture from Marxism.
If functionalism sees glue, Marxism sees chains.
Hmm.
Religion legitimizing inequality and propping up capitalism.
That's a good way to put it. They come back hard on the opium of the masses idea. Religion dulls the pain of oppression with those promises of afterlife rewards.
And that's why the ruling class tolerates or even encourages it. Keeps the workforce passive.
That's the argument. Focus on the next life, not changing this one. Lenin's spiritual gin numbing people to their exploitation. Religion acts as ideology here.
Teaching the poor that their situation is God's will, maybe. Or just how things are meant to be.
Exactly. It creates false class consciousness. The working class doesn't see their shared situation, doesn't see the exploitation, so they don't unite to challenge capitalism.
The contrast with functionalism is just stark, isn't it? One sees unity and stability, the other sees manipulation and control.
Fundamentally opposed views on the same phenomenon. Now, let's bring in the feminist perspective again, which, like Marxism, is critical.
Focusing squarely on religion as a source and reproducer of gender inequality. Patriarchy.
Yes, the argument is that many religious institutions, texts, and practices actively disadvantage women.
We touched on this male leadership, texts depicting women as subordinate, maybe even the concept of God being predominantly male in many traditions.
All contributing to a system where men hold power. And Simone de Beauvoir's point, again, religion offering women spiritual comfort that might make them accept earthly inequality. That false hope idea again, but through a gender lens.
And the specific example from Armstrong about bishops, that really grounds it in institutional practice.
It shows the structures maintaining that inequality. Feminism pushes us to see the real-world social impact on gender relations. How do these beliefs actually play out in reinforcing gender roles?
So we've got religion as stability, religion as inequality. But it's not always conservative, is it? The material says it can actually drive social change.
Yes, this is crucial. It directly challenges that Marxist view that religion only prevents change.
And the classic sociological case is Max Weber, the Protestant ethic and the spirit of capitalism.
Right. Weber argued, quite famously, that certain Calvinist beliefs were actually key in the development of modern capitalism in the West.
Beliefs like predestination and living a simple, disciplined life, asceticism.
Exactly. Predestination created anxiety about salvation, which Calvinists tried to alleviate through hard work and success in their calling, which they saw as a sign of God's favor. But their asceticism meant they didn't spend their profits on luxuries.
So they reinvested it.
They reinvested it back into their businesses. This continuous, religiously motivated cycle of work, profit, and reinvestment, Weber argued, was a crucial engine for early capitalism.
That's fascinating. And the material also brings in Steve Bruce's work, looking at more recent examples.
Yes, two contrasting cases. First, the American Civil Rights Movement. Bruce highlights how black churches were vital.
Providing organization, leadership, like Martin Luther King, moral grounding.
Absolutely. Religion was a powerful resource for unity and mobilization, facilitating massive, positive social change through nonviolent protest.
But then he contrasts this with the new Christian right in the U.S.
Another religious group aiming for social change, but Bruce argues they've been much less successful, despite getting a lot of attention.
Why the difference? The material suggests things like intolerance, maybe being out of step with broader modern values.
That seems to be Bruce's assessment. It raises a really interesting question. What makes religion an effective agent of change sometimes, like with civil rights, but not others? It clearly depends on the context, the values, how it interacts with the wider society.
Yeah, it's not just about the religion itself, but how it fits in. Okay, finally, the postmodernist view. How do they see religion today?
Well, they see its role as changing dramatically. They argue traditional organized religion has lost a lot of power and authority in modern fragmented societies. And that decline itself is a form of social change.
Because those big meta-narratives, those claims to absolute truth, just don't resonate as much in a world with so many competing views.
That's the core idea. Plus, her view later talks about cultural amnesia. People don't just inherit religion through family tradition like they used to. Secularization has weakened that link.
So individuals are more like consumers.
Yeah.
Choosing beliefs.
That leads into Lyon's idea of the religious marketplace. Individuals pick and mix, creating personalized spiritualities. Religion itself adapts, using media and technology, almost like marketing, to attract followers.
So it becomes part of consumer culture, in a way. Faith adapts to the modern world.
That's the postmodern picture. It paints a very different landscape of belief compared to what Durkheim or Marx were seeing. How does that idea of a religious marketplace strike you? How does it change how we think about faith?
It definitely suggests something much more fluid, much more individualized. Wow.
We've covered a lot of ground here. Different ways to classify religion, the open versus closed dynamic, and then these big theoretical lenses. Functionalism, Marxism, feminism, the potential for social change, and this postmodern shift.
It's really clear that sociology gives you multiple ways, sometimes conflicting ways, to analyze religion. It's a complex, vital part of social life, and you need these different tools to even begin to grasp it.
And taking these ideas and applying them to what you see around you, to specific examples, that's where the real sociological understanding deepens.
So maybe a final thought for you to take away from this deep dive. We've seen religion viewed as order, as inequality, as change, now even as a marketplace. How does exploring all these different sociological perspectives challenge or maybe sharpen your own assumptions about what belief systems are actually doing in the world today?
Definitely something to keep thinking about. Keep exploring.